So I have a special announcement for you today. For a limited time, you can get 6 months of Slate Plus for just $29. That's really good. That's 50% off. As a member, you'll get no ads on any of our podcasts, unlimited reading on the Slate site, and member-exclusive episodes and segments from our show and other shows like Slow Burn, Amicus, and Political Gabfest. Slate's podcasts cover major news events from elections to social issues to historic court decisions. Our shows discuss what makes a song a smash. They analyze what's going viral and decode cultural mysteries. And if we've become a part of your listening routine, we ask that you support our work by joining Slate Plus. So sign up for Slate Plus now at slate.com/moneyplus to access all Slate's content and support our work. Again, that's just $29 for 6 months through October 28th. So sign up now at slate.com/moneyplus. Hello and welcome to the We Can't Quit Elon edition of Slate Money, your guide to the business and finance news of the week. I am Emily Peck. I'll be your host today, and I am here with Elizabeth Spires.
Hello.
No Felix this week. He's off gallivanting in Italy, but in his place, we have the amazing Ed Lee.
Hello, hello. It's fun to be back.
And Ed is...
I'm an editor at the New York Times, of all places. So, yeah, I know. But don't hold it against me.
No, we will hold nothing against you.
I'm actually not a bad guy.
Ed and Liz and I, we're going to talk today about Nobel Prize winners. We are going to talk about Elon Musk. Again, I'm sorry, but it had to be done. And of course, we are going to start off by talking about my favorite word, the inflation. And that is all coming up on Slate Money. This message is brought to you by Discover. Did you know you could reduce the number of unwanted calls and emails with online privacy protection, the latest innovation from Discover? Discover will help regularly remove your personal info, like your name and address, from 10 popular people search websites that could sell your data. And they'll do it for free. Activate in the Discover app. See terms and learn more at discover.com/online privacy protection. Hey there, Slate Money listeners. Before we start the show, I want to let you know about a story coming up a little later. It's from one of our sponsors, Charles Schwab. At Schwab, a passion for serving clients is not just part of a job description. It's one of their core values. It's this human element that helps set Schwab apart. Stick around to hear how Ray, a Schwab employee who designs digital experiences, works to provide more people with access to the financial tools and knowledge they deserve. So, the inflation, as I like to call it, it's still inflating. And earlier this week, we got the September CPI report and learned that prices rose again at double the rate economists were predicting. And the core inflation measure, the one where you strip out food and energy, prices are up 6.6% from last year, and that's the highest in 4 decades. So, we're obviously well past the quote unquote transitory phase of bloviating and saying these numbers are going to get better. And I feel like at this point, there are some big reasons why these inflation numbers matter and why we're talking about them again. One, obviously, rising prices are painful for a lot of people, especially when pay isn't keeping up, which it really isn't. And the second big thing that everyone seems to be watching and talking about right now is, the Federal Reserve, which has said they're going to keep hiking interest rates until the inflation is crushed. And that action from the Federal Reserve is, causing a lot of pain basically around the globe right now. And one reason I guess I wanted to talk about this is the Federal Reserve usually is this like nerdy little world that no one cares about. Stacey Vanek Smith this week in NPR had a column about how everyone's now talking about Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve and how that's worrying. And so I'm wondering, Ed, are your friends talking about the Federal Reserve?
Yeah, I guess, I don't know. My friends are not as economically aware. And that's probably, a sign of a certain kind of benefit, right? If you're not as concerned, everyone's generally concerned. Of course, we still go to the grocery store and see like, oh man, like this costs $50 and I normally spend 20 or 30, whatever it might be. So we all notice it, but I don't think a lot of us are necessarily wondering exactly what Jerome Powell is going to do next. At least the normies among us. I mean, as reporters, of course, we're like 75 basis points, 50. What's the next? Like, let's look at that dot plot again. For normal people, it's not really a thing, I think.
That's funny. I feel like there's a certain strain of conservative dialogue right now where it is a thing. I sort of use my hometown as a kind of baseline for determining whether that's happening. And I had a conversation. I was I grew up in a rural area in Alabama, and I was back there a few weeks ago, and there was a guy I know from my childhood who started complaining about the Fed. He was on this sort of abolish the Fed kind of kick, and I was confused by what he was saying because he didn't seem to understand entirely what the Fed does.
Wow.
But it's sort of become a meme that the Fed is this shadowy central institution.
The deep state.
Yeah, no, they think it's controlled by the deep state, and that ironically that Powell is a plant of the Democratic Party, and then you have to explain to them that Powell was a Trump appointee, and it's but it's sort of been memed into this weird piece of the conversation.
I guess I don't know. Like, is that? I mean, of course, with the midterms coming up, right? That's what the GOP wants. They want the debate to center on inflation and the economy.
Yeah, and they want to be able to pin it on Democrats.
Exactly right. And that's the thing. These CPI numbers, it's not good for the Biden administration if you want to sort of just put a cold political calculus against it, right? Which is like, it's not easing the way that you said it was supposed to, and so the Republicans in the midterms are going to use this as a political sort of rallying point, right? So yeah, I get that part.
Do you think people are genuinely worried about a Volcker scenario where the Fed just goes apeshit? And
I think economists certainly are wondering about this, especially with how much more can you really do this sort of I'm going to call it quantitative to a degree, right? These quantitative measures ultimately. It's a little bit like trying to, hammer a nail with a feather. It's like, is that really going to do anything? Or are you just going to cause more turmoil in the markets, the bond markets, which it does have a more direct effect on. But in terms of the everyday people, like your friend back in Alabama, it's like, yeah, like, do they really know what that's going to mean for them? All they know is, yes, like my grocery bills are higher, right? Like shit just costs more. So that definitely sucks. And I think we all feel it. But tying it to like exactly what the Fed is going to be doing, I don't think anyone really knows.
I think one thing I've been wondering about, so that the Fed has a dual mandate, right? It has to keep inflation to target at 2%, and it's supposed to keep employment kind of full employment, calibrated. And the last time, like Elizabeth mentioned, when we had high inflation, Paul Volcker came in and raised rates famously and pushed the unemployment rate up over 10%. So people are, wondering now, or economists, or I'm wondering, what's going to happen with unemployment. And right now it's just extremely low. And I wrote a piece this week about why this could be. One reason that layoffs aren't higher and unemployment hasn't gone up yet is that companies were so fast to lay people off in 2020, March and April, that they're now doing something called labor hoarding and holding on to their workers because they just don't want to go through the stress and hell of having to rehire everybody. And this brings me a lot of joy. But Elizabeth, what do you think? Do you think this is actually happening, or it's just sort of a calm before the storm?
I mean, I think it could be. It's strange how much the dialogue is, contradicts what's actually happening. I still hear strains of, we have a problem because nobody in this country wants to work, but we're at full unemployment almost. So the labor hoarding thing kind of makes sense to me because I think there were a lot of companies that were burned after they did layoffs, and then as the pandemic, slowed down a little bit, they really struggled to get people back in the door. Mm-hmm. So intuitively, it makes sense.
Yeah, and I've written about the railroad industry now a few times because they're trying to negotiate, or they're trying to ratify a new contract now. The union is. And one thing I learned last week was that, when the pandemic first hit, the railroad companies like reflexively furloughed and laid off workers because that's their go-to playbook, and a lot of companies' playbook now. And then when all of a sudden, by June 2020, demand was crazy and they needed all those workers to come back, they called them back and they didn't come. And they've been struggling ever since. And I think I just love to see it.
No, I think that makes complete sense as well. Like if you just sort of query any kind of small business owner, right? Like they're going to tell you like, oh, I can't hire enough workers. I can't find them. So they're less likely to want to lay off whoever they have, even if they start to see some kind of downturn or if they start to see higher prices in the supply chain, because like the pain of having the whole friction of like finding people to work, to period, right? It's not even like you want the best person or the right person. You just need people. You just need bodies. They don't want to have to go through that. So I think labor hoarding is a real thing. I think that's also part of the reason why we're seeing the CPI number. And I think if now getting back to the Fed and Jay Powell and conspiracy theories, like if you were to press him, like, after a few drinks and like, come on, you really want unemployment to be a little higher, don't you? Right. He would probably say, like he might nod and wink in that direction. It's like, yeah, like just the math doesn't work out. Right. Like there has to be a slightly higher level of unemployment in order for us to bring the prices down. Interest rates are only going to do so much around that. And, the whole point of interest rates is you want to sort of tamp down the money supply and like have businesses sort of cool down their spending. But if they're going to labor hoard, that defeats that, right? So you're just like, what do you do?
I also wonder, we've talked a lot on this show about the way that everyday people think about inflation and what their metrics are, because the average person isn't like, well, core CPI is blah, blah, blah.
They're not?
They have like one variable that they look at. And for the last few months, it's been gas prices.
Yes.
And gas prices are cranking down now. So what do you think public perception is of where we are inflation-wise?
No, I think that's a great question. I think it's like we should go back to your friend in Alabama or just like people on the street, really. It's like, where are you really, like, where is it hurting you? What are you spending more on? And, gas prices, well, actually, they're going down. Like, my tank's still full. It's okay. So I do think there is this dissonance, right, between what's actually happening to people in their pocketbooks versus what the political rhetoric has been, right? So this idea of inflation, which it's out there, we're all the big media, they're writing stories about it, putting it on the front page. It does affect everybody, but what is it? How does it really affect the person on the street? Where is it really hitting them? And I think, also if labor hoarding and unemployment being really low, it's like, what are we complaining about exactly? Yes, things cost more, but.
Wow, I really disagree. As someone who, shops for food and things like that, I mean, you can't not notice how high prices have become. That NPR piece I mentioned before, there's a guy in there who had his like aha moment when he went to buy cinnamon rolls at the supermarket, the ones in the can that you twist, it makes that satisfying pop sound. And they cost, I don't know what she said, like $5 for a can or something. I feel like everyone has had that moment. For me, it was this summer buying the $2.50 can of Pepsi, but it's hard not to notice how high prices have gone.
Yeah, I wonder too, one area where prices have really skyrocketed is healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
They're up something like 24%. But do people notice that? Because so many people have employer-provided healthcare that's either subsidized by an employer or paid, in some cases paid in full. Do you think that registers with people?
That's a really good question. Yeah, that's kind of a hidden cost, though you'd notice your paycheck isn't going up as much as you think it should be or isn't what you think it should be because they're taking more money out of it for health insurance.
Yeah, and I also think it's, if you're going a lot, right, to the doctor or you've got specialists you have to go to, I mean, yes, a lot of that is a fixed cost that is through your provider. So your employer may be sort of feeling that more certainly. I don't necessarily know that you are, but yeah, you're right. I love those cinnamon rolls, by the way. And like, I think we've all felt it for sure. I mean, for me, like I'm a big coffee drinker. So, I would go get my pound of coffee beans and then grind them. And I've noticed Well, the price hadn't really changed, but then I noticed that like the actual amount of coffee in the bag had.
What there's a word, there's like a term for, yes, there's a term for that.
Right.
Shrinkflation.
Right, exactly. So I'm paying the same amount, but I'm having to pay, for more of these bags ultimately, right? And, they're not lying. It says on the bag, like what the actual, I remember it's like something like, instead of 16 ounces, it's like 12 ounces, right? Yeah. I'm like, huh. But they're still charging the same, right? Mm-hmm. So, it's a bit of sleight of hand, but yes, I'm ultimately spending more. And I'm like, yeah, coffee's expensive. I mean, it was already expensive before then, and then it's like even more expensive now. So yeah, I think people are definitely feeling it. But relative to, are you able to keep your job? Yes, your wages are not in line with the rate of inflation. So yeah, that also sucks. So in all kinds of ways you're hurting. But, I think there's that give and take, right? Like, well, employers are not laying people off as quickly or as readily as they had before. Yes, your paycheck sucks, but you have a paycheck. I mean, not that should be the bar by any means. So I think it's like the economy is in a really, really tough spot that Jay Powell probably is just like, again, if you cornered him and asked him like point blank, it's like, can you figure this out? He'll probably say, I can't.
Yeah. Do we think it would have been better if he'd started rate hikes earlier?
Oh, yeah. I think even he admitted that too. It's like in hindsight, right? That whole thing, it's like, oh yeah, we probably should have started that sooner and probably tempt inflation. But like all these, this black swan event of coronavirus and supply chain, and like there's still supply chain issues, right? So, which is really keeping prices up. So yes, low unemployment, there's a lot of cash out there. Things are costing more, period, because of the seize up in the supply chain that's still ongoing. So yes, I don't know how you unstuck this, right? That's the problem. And I think, again, interest rates, I don't think is enough, which I'm going to do the segue now, guys, right? So back in 07, 08, basically when the banks were failing because of the whole mortgage crisis, Ben Bernanke, who was, head of Fed at the time, basically said, all right, I'm going to do this new thing, guys. This is called quantitative. He didn't say this, right? But it's called quantitative easing. It's basically like balance sheet economics, right? I'm just going to make more money and it's going to show up on the balance sheet. And we're going to use that money to bail out the banks. And everyone was like, are you insane?
Slate Money is supported by First Republic Bank, which, full disclosure, is my bank. With a secure banking app that allows you to bank anywhere, anytime, and a dedicated personal banker when you need one-on-one service, First Republic is uniquely positioned to offer the best of both worlds. With this combination of personal attention and convenience, it's no wonder that First Republic Bank has a client satisfaction rating 2 times the industry average. So whether you're starting on your financial journey or planning for your future, you can count on First Republic to be there for you every step of the way. Visit firstrepublic.com today to learn more. That's firstrepublic.com. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender.
Slate Money is brought to you by Progressive. What's one thing you'd purchase with a little extra savings? A weighted blanket? Smart speaker? That new self-care trend you keep hearing about? Well, Progressive wants to make sure you're getting what you want by helping you save money on car insurance. Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save over $700 on average, and customers can qualify for an average of 6 discounts when they sign up. Discounts like having multiple vehicles on your policy. Progressive offers outstanding coverage and award-winning claim service. Day or night, they have customer support 24/7, 365 days a year. When you need them most, they're at their best. A little off your rate each month goes a long way. Get a quote today at Progressive.com and see why 4 out of 5 new auto customers recommend Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National annual average insurance savings by new customer surveyed who save with Progressive between June 2020 and May 2021. Potential savings will vary. Discounts vary and are not available in all states and situations. And we're talking about this, Ed is bringing it up right now, because we are going to talk about the big news from earlier this week, which was that Ben Bernanke, who chaired the Federal Reserve from 2006 to 2014 through the financial crisis, became the first policymaker to win an economics Nobel Prize.
That's a big deal. Yeah.
Yeah. So since 1968, when they first started giving these things out to economists, no policymaker had ever won. Bernanke won alongside two other guys, Douglas Diamond and Philip Dybvig. And so that was sort of the big news. And it was a little bit controversial, but I'll let you explain why they won.
I think it's fascinating on a number of levels, right? As you pointed out, it's the first time a policymaker was granted the Nobel, but specifically because he was in a policymaking role, right? That they cited the fact that based on a paper he wrote when he was at MIT, like talking about how banks, are as much a factor or a function of a faltering or potentially faltering economy. In other words, economy fails, the banks fail, right? His point was, well, banks can fail, which then could cause the economy to fail. And it seems straightforward, right? But, it was sort of a revelation in a way. Mm-hmm. And so he applied that theory to the crisis and said, we can't let the banks fail, right? Mm-hmm. They're too big to fail.
Yeah.
Basically.
Back in the 1980s, people didn't think the financial system was an important part of the economy, which seems crazy now,
today,
especially
right? Yeah.
for us. We lived through that 2008 crisis, and we're like, we know that's not true because that crisis came from the financial sector.
Yeah, and I think we had in the 80s less global interdependence, and so that might have been a factor too.
I think you're absolutely right. It's huge. That's a huge factor, and but there's something a little bit weird about this like 07-08 crisis, right? Which is the crisis was a financial crisis to begin with, right? Yes, it was rooted in mortgages, right? Which were then packaged and repackaged in such a way that like there's so much more money being bet on these mortgages, a lot of them which were not good mortgages, period, then collapsed, right? And so it was of its own making. It wasn't like something happened in the manufacturing sector that all of a sudden it's like they can pay their loans. It was sort of a very kind of almost insular, financially derived crisis. Now, there are arguments for and against that idea, but, it's almost like there was something self-fulfilling about that. And so then Bernanke came in and said, hey, I know how to handle this. I've studied this very closely. We can't let the banking sector fail. I don't think anyone disagrees with that. I think, yes, you can't let it because it's so much a part of the guts of the economy, right? The way money flows, the way you can't. This happened in the Great Depression, right? When the banks failed, like it just prolonged the depression just because of things couldn't start up again, right? It took that much longer. And so that was his great sort of insight. And more importantly, like he applied it in real world terms and basically bailed out the banks, right? And people are still up in arms about that, right?
Yeah, I think it's because it's more like when people understand the credit crisis from a 30,000-foot perspective, the only thing they see is we bailed out all these banks and we created a maybe moral hazard that gives them some incentive to continue securitizing these crazy products. And I'm not sure that's really true. I think it's a function of the fact that the credit crisis was complex and there are a lot of underlying factors, and people don't really understand that. So they just see the policy result.
Right. It's just like you bailed out the banks, right? And like, I think you're right. I think there's such a complexity to it. But this is sort of what I want to try to get at is there's such a complexity to it. Like this weird thing that Bernanke did, this quantitative easing, where you're basically putting more money on the balance sheet by just stating it practically, yep. Right? Like it was really clever and creative, but it's also like, what did that really do? Like, was it even enough? In other words, like, could he have gotten farther? Right? Like one of the criticisms of Bernanke is that he didn't bail out Lehman, right? If you're going to bail out all these others, but not this one, like, well, they were in much worse shape. Okay, so you're drawing a line somewhere. I get that. But like, had you applied that principle, like in the principled way, like you would have bailed out Lehman too, right? Because one bank versus another, they all kind of screwed up. And so, that is still a criticism. Another criticism is that, hey, man, like, didn't you foresee this mortgage crisis? Like the ridiculousness of the securitized loan things that like they kept repackaging over and over again. Like it was just bizarre that this was even happening. How did you not regulate that? How did you not see that coming, forward? And maybe it's not a central bank solution. Maybe it needed to be legislated in some way or regulated in through other agencies as well. It just didn't happen.
The bit about regulation, I think, is really key because I think there was some expectation that the SEC would come in and regulate these products, and it just didn't happen. So you ended up with, crazy CDO squared kind of, where the underlying assets just get completely decoupled from what the end product looks like.
Two interesting criticisms I thought this week of Bernanke. One was sort of in line with what you were saying, Ed. Basically, he was slow to act because before he was Federal Reserve Chair, he was at the Federal Reserve, and Greenspan was in charge. And that's, when the run-up to the housing bubble was really getting underway. And Bernanke apparently had said at the time, like, he didn't see the issues yet. So that's one criticism. And the other one that's sort of interesting for the present moment that I was reading about this week was that the quantitative easing that Bernanke, did during the crisis, which was obviously successful in shoring up the financial system when it really needed it, that Powell took that playbook, in 2020, which we've talked about on the show with Nick Timmeros from the Journal, and, put it on hyperdrive, basically, and didn't stop when he should have stopped, as we said in the previous segment, leading to, a bunch of inflation. Like basically that pioneering innovation that Bernanke kind of kicked into gear was taken too far, possibly by Powell, and got us to our present moment. And I kind of feel that's like a little unfair, but I wonder what you guys think.
I think that's kind of right, though. I'm going to be harsh. I'm going to be harsh on the Fed, not for conspiracy reasons and not for GOP talking points. I think there are a few things. I think it's unfair in the sense that we rely on the Fed to solve too many things. I think more needs to be legislated. I think more needs to be regulated. These are Democratic, viewpoints, certainly. But I do think it's so complex and it's such a Wild West thing that, everyday people ultimately get screwed, when you don't sort of really handle this. And I think that's the problem, is that it's, America is still, unlike Europe, right, is still sort of this free market Wild West that that's why a lot of money still flows into this country, right? And that's not a bad thing at all. But, it's not, there needs to be more guardrails. There just needs to be more regulation. That's just my stance on that.
I agree with that. I think another thing is, everybody is very aware of interest rate hikes because that's something that I think, everyday people understand. But what do you think about Powell's strategy with regard to the Fed's balance sheet? I mean, they're supposed to be tapering.
Yeah.
Right. That's what I'm kind of saying. Like they took that too far. And now the unwind of that is causing a lot of problems throughout the economy, throughout the world, basically.
Yeah. And I think you both bring up great points. And I think, I think what's interesting and difficult, I will give Powell credit for being more transparent in his language, which I think a lot of people have given him credit for. But I also think it speaks to sort of his thinking as well, in terms of he is much more market sensitive than other Fed chairs that I've seen. Not that I'm a huge expert in this area, but I think he's very market sensitive. Not a bad thing. It's a good signal to take in. And of course, he takes in all these other signals as well that aren't specifically about the markets. But, I feel like he's sort of like always playing catch up to the markets in that way.
That's also, that's structural to the Fed, too. It's supposed to be an organization or an institution that's slow to act by design.
Exactly. And I think the whole, when, previous Fed chairs like Bernanke and Greenspan, it's like I think they were kind of elliptical on purpose, right? Their statements were purposely elliptical to prevent too much of an interpretation by the markets, and that the markets had to sort of, you're on your own, right? You have to figure it out. That's the whole point. And if there's too much of a feedback mechanism between these two entities, you end up with I think you get this weird white noise that happens, right? And no one really knows how to react to the other. It gets too close at some point,
But I also think it can sometimes move in the other direction. Too much, Fed chairs are a little too cryptic about things, and people make assumptions, and market reacts to that.
Exactly.
This message is brought to you by Discover. Did you know you could reduce the number of unwanted calls and emails with online privacy protection, the latest innovation from Discover? Discover will help regularly remove your personal info, like your name and address, from 10 popular people search websites that could sell your data, and they'll do it for free. Activate in the Discover app. See terms and learn more at discover.com/online privacy protection.
This podcast is brought to you by Slate Studios and Charles Schwab. Charles Schwab believes in breaking down the barriers to investing, making it accessible to all. Ray is a director of user experience. Her passion is making education accessible to all investors. Through digital design and experiences, Ray ensures Schwab's technology works seamlessly for clients so they can make informed decisions about their finances.
I didn't know anything about investing. I didn't learn it in school. What is a stock? What is a mutual fund? What are futures? All these different financial instruments. And so every day I come in thinking about the real person who doesn't want to spend their time studying and becoming experts in this, yet they need to have enough knowledge to make sure they're protected and doing the right things. My expertise is always representing what our clients need, how to talk to them in a way that lets us meet them where they are, and always advocating for doing the right thing for them.
At Charles Schwab, they're not just financial people, they're people too. With free investing education and 24/7 support, Schwab offers the tools to help you pursue your financial goals. That's how Schwab makes investing accessible for all. Learn more about what sets Schwab apart at schwab.com/whyschwab.
This message is brought to you by Discover. Did you know you could reduce the number of unwanted calls and emails with online privacy protection, the latest innovation from Discover? Discover will help regularly remove your personal info, like your name and address, from 10 popular people search websites that could sell your data. And they'll do it for free. Activate in the Discover app. See terms and learn more at discover.com/online privacy protection.
So speaking of people that communicate a lot on to the markets, should we talk about Elon Musk?
I feel like we should issue an apology to listeners before we even start the segment.
This is just like a general disclaimer.
Yeah, we were really hoping that we could ban Elon from as a topic generally, and we can't, apparently.
You can't quit Elon. You can't quit Elon.
We can't quit Elon. Elizabeth, will you catch us up?
Yeah, so the sort of high-level version of what's happening is a continuation of Elon's behavior so far with regard to purchasing Twitter, which is that he's sort of been just a chaos monkey in the system.
So let's back up. So back in April, Elon Musk said he wanted to buy Twitter, $54.20 a share. Get it? 420, ha, ha, ha. And everyone was shocked, and we talked about it on Slate Money. Then he backed out and said he didn't want to buy Twitter because something, spam and bots. But everyone sort of understood he just maybe got cold feet and the markets turned. Then Twitter took him to court in Delaware to sue him to go through with the deal. And that was kind of moving forward. The suit was kind of moving forward. And then at the end of September, we got a peek inside of Elon Musk's text messages, and they were just a total embarrassment to him. And then, and I'm not saying A led to B, but right after the public read Elon Musk's private and embarrassing text messages, he then said, you know what? I'll do it. I'll buy Twitter. Never mind. It's fine. I'll do it.
Yeah, well, he didn't want more stuff to come out, I think. The thing about the text messages that is really significant here is that they just illustrate how little real strategic thinking went into Elon deciding that he wanted to buy Twitter. And that sort of comports with my not very flattering view of him, which is that he does things impulsively. And as a, super rich guy is surrounded by yes men who, if he throws out like any kind of idea, they just nod and tell him he's a genius. And so, and it just went too far this time.
the texts reveal that people that billionaires essentially surround themselves with incredibly unimaginative, craven individuals who will just yes the whole thing and not really help the guy.
Well, also that when they put themselves in environments like that, they're not forced to do any critical thinking, and they don't realize it because they're sort of in a bubble. And I also think in Elon's case, he's so accustomed to publicly communicating what he wants to do, and then just expecting that it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. And he gets off on antagonizing the SEC, which I think Matt Levine jokes has an entire department. It's just the Elon Musk department.
I actually think that's probably real too. Like there's got to be. There's no way they could
They have
monitor.
at least 10 guys
easily
dedicated to it.
Right.
I'm curious, Ed, I mean, you've been watching media deals for a long time. Is there anything comparable to what we've seen in this sort of back and forth? I want to buy you. I don't want to buy you. I'll buy you kind of vibe?
I mean, the closest would be Sumner Redstone, right? Like Sumner was a brash, bold, deal maker where he would borrow tons of cash to do these massive deals that he had no business doing, right? That he actually ended up on top. He made a success out of most of these deals. And so, but like, it was clear, it was very much through his gut, right? He's not a balance sheet guy. He's not a financial wizard type person. He's a smart guy, or he was a smart guy, but it was very much a gut thing that he went with. And so, but a lot of guys back then, and they're really mostly guys, right? Especially in media, it's very much a fly by the seat of your pants. My gut tells me this. And yeah, let the lawyers figure out the specifics, but I want this, right? The difference in this, so Elon has definitely a flavor of that. The difference, though, is that he also thinks, that he's this brilliant technocrat, that he's figured out all the puzzle pieces, and that not just the product, but the finances and everything. And clearly he hasn't, right? So that's where it really falls apart. It's that it's one thing to have a gut reaction to something. My instinct tells me this is what I should do. And then you have people around you sort of like temper that a little bit with like, well, it's not worth this much, it's worth that much. We'd have to do this versus that. And you're like, all right, fine. Whereas he's just like, he thinks he's figured the whole thing out by himself.
There's also, there's nobody who would suggest that Redstone didn't understand media and how it works. And, another thing that stands out about the text and the stuff that Elon said publicly on Twitter is that he doesn't necessarily understand it, but he assumes that his expertise in other areas is transitive, which is a thing that I think is really endemic to tech billionaires.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Tech people think they can algorithm the world. And I think it's sort of like having worked with people out there a lot, and I've seen this firsthand, where they think any kind of social problem, any kind of sort of even artistic problem is ultimately solvable through code. And, in some cases they're right about a lot of that, but there's so much of it that they're wrong about.
There's a lot more like, well, we'll solve poverty via the blockchain.
Right, exactly. Right. It's like, huh? And that's what like guys like Andrew Yang sort of had that kind of appeal to a lot of these sort of like techno-libertarian types. And I think, Elon is very much of that ilk. And he has this very kind of like elementary sense of like free speech, right? He just thinks like, yes, anyone should be able to say anything all the time. That's the whole point of free speech. And yes, as long as you don't harm other people. And then like, okay, great. Who gets to decide that? Where do you draw those lines? Who makes those assessments, right?
Also, he's gone after critics legally. So it's sort of, the disingenuousness of it is astounding.
He's had employees sign NDAs, like, about like, potentially what, alleged sexual harassment claims for one, and or just sort of the company that they work for, like, so he typifies exactly every nightmare that people have about the richest person in the world, right? That they can do anything they want, mostly. And, he's the living embodiment of that nightmare, right? An unchecked entity.
The other thing I wondered about what you guys thought, because he hasn't really said much about what he would do to change Twitter, except for like unleash Trump back on the world, which no one really wants, I don't think.
Right,
But then
right.
I think last week or the week before, he said he wanted Twitter to be an everything app, which I guess is the thing in China where, you have one app you use to like hail a car, order groceries, text your friend, and do your banking. And that's what he saw as Twitter's future.
Which is a wild misunderstanding of what you can and can't do with Twitter.
I think so. And really any app in the United States at this point, it just seems like, and maybe I'm too short-sighted, I'm not a billionaire, so I don't know. But it seems like that ship has sailed. Like the time to do that would have been, I don't know, like 10 years ago, right?
Well, also after he said that, a bunch of people who do know what they're talking about, who have worked on apps like Twitter, pointed out that it would be better if Elon, if he wanted to build everything app, just build it from scratch instead of paying this much for Twitter. And he kept just sort of insisting that, no, this will accelerate development. But then he couldn't explain how.
Yeah.
Right. And like my phone is my everything app. Like I don't need it to be more drilled down. I pick up my phone. I can do all the things he said you could do with the one app, just on different ones. It's totally fine. Like I don't need my toaster to also be my microwave.
Also, I don't know that even if he had done this 10 or 15 years ago, that would have, like, I wonder if there's as much a cultural aspect to this, like why you can't have a one app, at least not in this country, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, first of all, ultimately, you would get into these antitrust concerns for one.
Yeah, and data privacy concerns.
Yes. And there's just like this great competition in the app space, period. I mean, maybe it's not great, but there is competition is the point, right? And so, we like the idea that not all my eggs are in this one basket, and it's again, culturally, no, it's just, we don't like that idea.
Mm-hmm.
I want to have some of this choice, right? And then some of these other apps are better than others, and that's the whole point of the app economy in general. And so that flies in the face of that idea too. So where he's coming up with this, again, it's like he's still living in the PayPal days, maybe.
So, I mean, do you think we're going to talk about him again, you guys?
I have a bad feeling.
Yeah.
I don't think he's going away anytime soon.
All right. Let's do the numbers. Shall we? Shall we do the numbers? Elizabeth, do you have a number?
Yeah. So my number is 20%. And that's the amount of traffic increases you have to malls now if you stick a grocery store in one.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Whoa. Who's that from?
It was from a Bloomberg story. And this is particularly true for Class B malls, which are the kind that, the normies go to. The Class A malls are just all luxury stores and stuff.
That's interesting. This week, Kroger and Albertsons are trying to merge. It sort of gives you a sense of why it's a big deal.
Yeah, no, that's massive. That's a huge, wow. That's a great number. I love that number.
Well, Ed, can you beat it? Can you beat this number?
No, I definitely cannot.
Oh.
My number is pretty pedestrian. I'm going with $6.99.
What's that?
That is the price of Netflix's new ad tier service.
Dun, dun, dun.
Which tells us a whole lot of things if you really want to like kind of geek out for a second. Their basic plan costs $10, right? So this is $7. What they're telling you is we think there's at least $3 and a penny worth of ads that we can stuff into this tier. Chances are it's actually going to be much higher than that. In fact, based on what I know about how Hulu operates, right? Because Hulu has had an ad tier since essentially the beginning. Hulu's most profitable tier is their ad tier. It's their best performing tier.
Huh.
Yeah. It generates more money per user than the non-ads one. So I think the non-ads one is like $16 or $17. Yeah. The ads one, from my reporting, I remember, and this is a little while ago, and it's pretty much held up, is closer to 18 or 19, something like that. So it generates more revenue and it generates more profit. And it's also the most widely used tier. So Netflix is essentially tiptoeing into this, well, there's be 4 or 5 minutes of ads per hour of viewing. Not everything is going to be on there, unfortunately, but we're working on that because they don't have rights to everything to have ads against it. But I think Netflix will be surprised by how many people will pay for that version, will watch the ads because fine. And and especially with inflation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they will start to realize, oh crap, we should have done this like a long time ago.
But Netflix, I mean, as a user, the best part of Netflix is the no ads. Like they have the best UX, I think, of all the streaming services. And I'm curious if they can do ads better for streaming than Hulu. Because Hulu, streaming ads are usually super repetitive. You wind up watching the same ones over and over. So Netflix could do it better. That would be interesting.
The problem is that that's something they can't control. They can't control the ad marketplace is the problem, right? And so that's why on Hulu you're seeing the same ads over and over again, because not enough advertisers are actually buying enough of the inventory for there to be enough competition, for there to be enough variety in the ads, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that kind of destroys their advantage of having the good UX.
Right. So their ad load, their ad sort of experience won't be that different from like a Hulu ultimately. So in that sense, like it's more of a head-to-head competition there. Disney Plus is going to have an ad. I think they already have one right now, right? Or they plan to launch it soon. So anyway, I think that's going to be like, they're all going to end up in the place of like basic cable. They're like, oh, ads plus fees is actually the most lucrative way to go. We're never going to go back.
Oh, no.
And then you're just going to feel like it's cable TV.
No. Well, Ed, that was a good number. So my number is 8.7 or 8.7%. That is the cost of living adjustment for people who get Social Security that was announced this week. It's the biggest one since 1981. And I think it's really cool that Social Security payments get adjusted for inflation. Not everything does, like my paycheck, for example, just saying. Yeah, it's very meaningful for a lot of people. It's like,
I think it's a great number. That's an awesome number. Yeah.
Maybe feeling inflation or thinking about it or whatever. But this isn't one place where everyone really, really cares about this stuff.
Well, that only goes back to what that's going to mean for inflation and consumer prices again, right? So you can totally see how Biden is probably like, oh man, now we're going to do this. It's like, so, but at the same time, it's like, yes, there's more money, right?
Yeah. All right. Well, that's it for this week. Thanks to Anna Phillips for producing. Thanks to Ed for coming. Elizabeth, thanks to you. And we'll be back with you next week on Slate Money. This message is brought to you by Discover. Did you know you could reduce the number of unwanted calls and emails with online privacy protection, the latest innovation from Discover? Discover will help regularly remove your personal info, like your name and address, from 10 popular people search websites that could sell your data, and they'll do it for free. Activate in the Discover app. See terms and learn more at discover.com/online privacy protection.